So I'm now recording as lovely. So I'm very excited to be sharing this series with you. It's a series that I've actually taught in a different community before, and I was waiting for an opportunity to have a chance to share it with Bushi. And I never thought that it would be a virtual opportunity, but you know what? We're going to take our lemons and make lemonade, aren't we? So this is really lovely, or probably the wrong fruit to use in this analogy, but it's a really lovely chance to share some of the ideas and things that I'd learned and prepared along the way with all of you. And as I said, it's going to be about the 7 species, but that's kind of like a springboard to talk about other ideas as well. So today we're going to be talking about wheat, and we're going to be talking about kindness, because wheat is very connected to kindness. And with each of the parts of the 7 species, so each week we're going to be talking about different things. You'll be glad to know that next Wednesday I will not be doing a lunch and learn. I don't think that any of us want lunch and learn next Wednesday. Can someone remind me, is the following Wednesday also Erev Yom Tov?
I think it is.
It's Yom Tov, it's 7th day. It's 7th day.
It's Yom Tov.
Okay, it's Yom Tov. Okay, perfect. So then I won't be doing it for 2 weeks. But after that, what's quite nice is we're going to be doing barley when it's the Omer. So it's nice, like for me, it's quite nice that we can fit in wheat beforehand, and obviously it's got quite a significant connection to our time right now. So to me, that was quite lovely that worked. Hi Joe, I can see you down there now as well.
Yeah, yes, I'm just looking up the Yom Tov.
Okay, lovely. Okay, so let's begin. We're going to first talk about the idea of the 7 species, because that's really important. So as we know, Israel is famed for having 7 species in it, and the place we know this from is there's a pasuk that talks about in Devarim, in Deuteronomy, and it talks about Eretz Chita o Sa'ora, Gefen o Te'ena, Rimon, Eretz Zayit, Shemen o Dvash. And as we have here in the English, a land of wheat and barley, of vines, of fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive oil and honey. Each time we're going to look at a different one. So the first thing that's quite interesting is if we look in Exodus, which is all about what our theme's about at the moment, there is a mitzvah where we take the choice first fruits of your soil, you shall bring to the house of the Lord your God. And this actually connects us in with something that's happening in about 8 weeks' time, so almost 7, but we're going to miss one for Pesach, the 7th day Pesach anyway, so that works well. But it takes us to what's going to be happening. We're going to start counting towards, which is Shavuot. And on Shavuot, that was when we took these fruits, the first of the fruits, and we took them to the Bet HaMikdash. Now, I've spoken about it whenever I've met with you. I'm going to try and mute you. I'm going to actually now mute everyone. If you want to unmute yourself to comment, please do. I'm just trying to avoid the feedback of my own voice. Okay, so please comment if you want to say anything. Just unmute yourself. So I've muted everyone now, but comment if you'd like. So, yes, so on Shavuot, we're going to be bringing these 7 species, and every talk that I've listened to, everyone that I've spoken to, so much of our conversation has been about how this year seems like such an ideal time. The airplanes are all grounded, waiting to take us to Israel. So please God, this year on Shavuot, we'll actually be able to take the 7 species with us. Wouldn't that be exciting, to the Bet HaMikdash for our Bikurim? But either way, this idea of these fruits being very, very special and very connected with our traditions is something that's very important. I'm going to ask you now to contribute. So maybe I should, you can unmute yourself. I think that's okay, then it's less for me to try and navigate. But 7 is a very significant number in Judaism. What would other 7s be? It's a very special number. What would other examples of 7 be, other than the 7 species?
7 days. 7 days in the week, 7 weeks.
7 days. The 7th day of the week makes Shabbat. What was the other one?
7 weeks of Omer.
Of the Omer, yeah, between Pesach and Shavuot. Joe, what did you have?
Or when you're praying, you repeat God's name 7 times at certain prayers, don't you?
Yeah, so there's lots of
Also with the bride, how many times do you go around the bride? 7?
Yeah, 7 times, that's right. A bride goes around 7 times. Any others? Anything else we can think of? Well, you've got 7 times 7. The 7th year is Shemitah, and then the 7th times the 7th year is Yovel, which is Jubilee. So we've got those 7 times 7 as well. 7 colors in the rainbow. If you want to say that's a Jewish concept, the rainbow, I don't know. You know, it's an everything concept, but it's part of God's creation. So that's an interesting one. There are lots and lots of different 7s in our tradition. So 7, as we know, is this special number. And what's very interesting as well is you have different places in Israel where they've actually planted 7 species gardens. Has anyone seen one of those?
No.
No? Okay.
Yes,
so
I think we have.
Yeah.
I
So when I was in Sem in Jerusalem, in Neve Yerushalayim, there was a 7 species garden. And one of the most amazing things was when you watch the pomegranates. Has anyone seen pomegranates blossom?
No.
And how the fruit grows. It's very exciting. We'll talk about it on the week when we talk about pomegranates, but that is a very exciting one. Okay. So if I would now ask you as a question, of the 7 species, which do you think is the most important and why?
The wheat, I think.
Is that just because we're talking about it this week, Joe?
Well, no, because it's bread, isn't it? It makes bread, and you need bread to.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think bread is, as we're going to discover next week, bread is vital for life, and we're going to be moaning and groaning our way through matzah or enjoying matzah, but 100% right. Bread is something that's so important to us.
I thought the olive oil was, because didn't the olive trees show ownership of the land?
So exactly. So olives has very, and what festival is olive oil connected to, Kathy?
Hanukkah.
Hanukkah, right? So we've got Hanukkah. What about let's see what else we have. Well, we've got, like we mentioned, barley. We've got the Omer coming up. That's quite significant. I think you're missing another crucial one.
Vines. The wine. Vines.
Go on. Why wine?
Well, the honey as well. And the sweet. Oh.
I was thinking about honey because that's a product of the pollen of flowers. It's not. It's not a species, a plant in the way that the others are.
Well, it's actually interesting, and it's when we talk about honey in this situation, we're actually talking about date honey. So good question, but we're actually talking about the honey of dates rather than the honey of bees. But when we talk about it, we will talk about both. But yes, you're right. It's what grows in the land we're talking about. So it would be date honey.
It's interesting because the Hebrew
other one, why?
The vash is honey, whereas wouldn't it be tamar?
Right. So why did it talk about the product rather than where it comes from? That's a very interesting one. And like I said, we'll talk about that on the week when we talk about honey. Why grapes, though? Why would you think grapes are very important in terms of Judaism?
Well, it's
wine.
Juices wine.
Yeah, everything.
Havdalah.
Yeah, everything is exactly everything we do is over a cup of wine, isn't it? That is how we sanctify every occasion. So what we will talk about is each week we'll discuss how that produce is the most important one, and you'll just bear with me because as we go through each one it will be like, and this week we're going to talk about why wheat is the most important of the 7 species, but this week is why that is what we're going to concentrate on, the idea of wheat being the most significant. Now, as I think was Joe, were you saying that wheat is kind of bread is how we eat, isn't it? It's our survival, isn't it?
Yes, it's basic staple food.
Exactly. That is exactly, that's something that makes wheat is so important. We've got our basic staple. So what's very interesting, if you look at the second source, I'm just checking that you can see the sheet clearly, yeah?
Can you move it up?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I can't see the bottom one. That's better, yeah.
No, I can't see it.
That's better. That's what we need.
That's it. Thank you.
Okay. So let's read that together. Ooh, If I can get rid of this.
Rabbi Judah said,
Yeah.
It's the tree of knowledge of good and evil was
It was
wheat.
wheat, because a child does not know to call father, mother
Father,
before it has
mother.
tasted wheat.
tasted wheat.
Okay, so there's a big debate in Brachot. What was it that Adam and Eve ate from the tree? So before you read that source, if I would ask you, from your Cheder days or from your looking in a Bible, illustrated Bible, what do we all think Adam and Eve ate when they ate from the tree of good and evil?
Yeah.
The apple. Now, the interesting thing is there's not one of the commentaries that say it was an apple. So we've all got this picture of an apple. I think it must come from Christian biblical teaching, because I can't find a source that shows that an apple was what Adam and Eve ate. Now, maybe there is one, maybe I don't know about it, but the interesting thing is when they're having a debate, they don't discuss the idea of the apple. They talk about other things. They talk about figs, so we'll discuss that in the class when we talk about figs. But one of the big things that they discuss that Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge was wheat. They ate a kernel of wheat. That was what they were told they shouldn't eat. Now, interesting to think of wheat growing on a tree. It reminds me little bit about, we have to mention that today is April Fool's Day. It does remind me a little bit about was it Panorama that had spaghetti trees one year? Does everyone remember that one?
Oh, yes.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So it
You're
does
too
remind
young
me.
to remember that.
Yes, I know, but I was told about it. So it reminds me, I think I've seen probably a clip on YouTube or something, Kathy, but you're right. But you know, this idea of making a joke out of something, or making how would you have it? But actually it sounds like the wheat was growing on a tree, and God said that he doesn't want Adam and Eve to eat from that, and in the end, we all know the story, they did end up eating from it. The interesting thing is, why does Rabbi Judah say that it was wheat? What's his explanation, his reasoning? Because this is in the Gemara, each rabbi who quotes which fruit they think it was, or which grain they think it was, has to give an explanation of why they're quoting that. Some say a grape, some say fig, etc. So how can they say that it was some wheat? What is Rabbi Yehuda's explanation? He says as follows. He says a child, how do you determine the age of that a child has some knowledge? And by knowledge we mean that when they say father or mother, they know who they're talking about. So what's that kind of developmental stage in the time of the Gemara? How would you determine that? It's at the point when they're able to eat wheat, that they can digest wheat. We know foods are introduced at different stages. So at the point where they can they're allowed to eat wheat, that is when they have knowledge to be able to tell the difference between their father and mother. So it's quite interesting that the description given is based on the development of being able to know other people or know other things around them. That determines knowledge, and that fits in with the idea of Adam and Eve weren't allowed to eat from this tree of knowledge, but when they got to this, when a child has this idea of knowledge, they're the ones, that's the point when they can eat wheat. So it's an interesting idea that we have connected to wheat, understanding that wheat actually shows a certain level of development to do with understanding. Okay, now here we have our lovely picture of all the different species in a basket that, please God, we are going to be bringing to the temple very, very soon. And what's very interesting is that we can look at each of the 7 species and we can parallel them with one of the 7 sephirot. So with one of the 7 levels that are connected with Kabbalah. So is anyone on here a Kabbalistic scholar?
Well, I'm not a scholar, but I have a lot of books, and I did study it for a lot of years. I've got I'd remembered you telling me that, Joe. So you might help me work my way through this, because I am not a scholar of Kabbalah. I'm not a scholar. I a while ago, but still, I recognise the sephirot on the tree.
Can you move it up a bit, Jacqueline? Can't see the bottom.
Sure. Wrong way.
That's gone down, up a bit.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, so this is so the seven sphirot, the seven, as we said, the seven Kabbalistic levels starts from the bottom and moves upwards. So you've got Chesed, which is kindness. Then you've got Gevurah, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchut. Those are the seven Sphirot. And then above that, you have something called Chachma, Bina, Vada'at, which is kind of like the crown, or the keter, the crown, because you've got 7 layers, but you've also got 10. Is that right, Joe?
10. Yes, 10.
Yeah. And actually, the word Chabad comes from Chachma, Bina, Vada'at. So that the Lubavitch Chabad mentality, that word, actually, that's where it comes from, is Chachma, Bina, Vada'at, which is interesting that their focus is on this connection to God and the crown of God's glory, which is why a lot of the things you see about them talks about a crown and everyone being on a mission of Hashem, which is something we all believe in, but they actually have that as their phrase of Chabad. It's just interesting to know that's where it comes from. So with all the 7s that we've mentioned, but specifically we're going to talk about in terms of with the 7 species, and actually with the Omer, which we're about to begin. The interesting thing on the Omer is you've got 7 weeks of 7 days. So we're counting from the time we left Egypt to the time that we got the Torah, between Pesach and Shavuot. And each of those weeks is signified by a different one of the Sphirot. And actually within that, so the first week is Chesed, the second week is Gevurah, etc. Within that, each day corresponds to a different one of the 7 Sephirot. So for example, the first day that we count, which is going to be our second day of Seder, it's always on the second night Seder, you have to remember to say the blessing of the Omer, which is a tricky one to remember, especially this year. That day, we would refer to it as Chesed Sheba Chesed, which is kindness within kindness. The second day would be called of Gevurah Sheba Chesed. So it's the strength element of kindness, and it goes through the whole series. Now, there are amazing resources out there that break this down for us. What does it really mean? Because when I say, you know, my brother-in-law will always joke about, oh, today have you worked on your Hod Sheba Yesod, your splendor within foundation? Like, what on earth does that mean, right? But there are resources that talk about, practically speaking, what should we be focusing on each of these days and each week. So the first week will be focusing on kindness. And hopefully this class can give us some of the tools to make sure that that is really what we're focusing on during that first week of Sfirat HaOmer. But the interesting thing is, I really think this year it's been a build-up of Chesed as well. You know, every direction you look in, yes, there's been challenging things and people behaving without Chesed or without proper understanding, but we're seeing unbelievable kindness and volunteering and helping and reaching out to people. It's been truly wonderful to see, and we're doing it ourselves, right? How many of us have picked up the phone and called someone that we've kind of haven't made the time for months? Because now actually it really means a lot to make sure that we speak to the people that we care about. We speak to the people that we know that need that phone call, right? How many of us are actually making sure that we're making the phone calls, you know, because we need to connect with the people that we love? So we're seeing quite a lot of this concept of Chesed, and I hope that we're displaying Chesed as well. We're displaying ourselves kindness, even if it's we're not next to anyone, even if we don't have a way of being next to anyone, but we can still focus on and share this idea of kindness. So that is really what we're talking about today. Now, why do you think that wheat is connected to kindness?
Because you share your bread break bread together when you're being hospitable, when you have a guest.
Definitely. So who in our Torah represented this?
Sarah.
Sarah. Yeah.
Sarah. And which man represented it as well?
Abraham.
Exactly. Abraham and Sarah really did represent this, the tent with the open side, giving, right? It's like this nature of just wanting to feed people, wanting to give to people. I mean, now you're seeing a little bit that there's almost like there's too much that people want to give and do. People are tripping over themselves because they want to be able to help people. And sometimes it's almost like too much, which is what we'll talk about actually next time. The idea of, yeah, the idea the idea.
Blender has got, that's a lot of meanings.
Unmute me. No, that was wrong. I don't know what I've done there. Okay. I'm hearing a bit of feedback, so if you can mute yourself, I might try to as well. Yeah, I think I've muted everyone else. I don't know. Okay. No, someone's still not muted. I can't do that.
Do you want me to mute mine?
Yeah, just when you want to comment, unmute it. It's just because I'm trying, otherwise I get a lot of echo, and I think other people might do that as well. Okay, so Avram and Sarah 100% represented this. Avram and Sarah had this open home, and I think one of the things we're really missing at the moment is the ability to go over to someone and spend time with them, the ability for someone to come to us, the ability for our shuls to have its doors open and to have that sharing and caring and kindness and connection, this people connection. I'm finding it so hard, and I think that's why I'm smiling so much when you see people on here. It's just so nice to see people's faces. You know, I know last night we had quite a few people come on a Zoom session. It was just so lovely to actually see other people, wasn't it? It was lovely to be with people. And this idea of kindness is something that when we can't do it, we really miss. The Hebrew word for kindness is chesed, right? The idea of giving chesed is a concept we know about, this idea of being able to give to other people. And it's such an important one. The bottom source that I have for you, if we can see it, is from Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers, which again is something actually that we're going to start reading. We read that between Pesach and Shavuot, and Rabbi Nick does on Thursday's Lunch and Learn. He goes through Pirkei Avot with us for anyone who wants to join. I know he's done this one already, but one of the first Pirkei Avot, it's actually the first Mishnah that's quoted, I'd say, is actually an introduction, because it talks about the transmission, the Masorah. It talks about Moshe teaching Joshua, Joshua teaching his students, and going on so forth, so on and so forth. And then we learn about Shimon HaTzadik, who's one of the people that received it from the men of the Great Assembly. So the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah was the men of the Great Assembly. They taught it to Shimon HaTzadik. And Shimon HaTzadik used to say, so this is actually the first kind of phrase that we're being taught that about the transmission of ethics. What was his big thing that he's going to share with us? He's going to tell us that the world stands on three things. The world stands on Torah, on avodah, which is service or prayer, which is something that we're very connected to at the moment, even though we don't have the ability to pray in shul. And we spoke about that last night, the idea of saying Tehillim or clicking onto our community Tehillim or joining in on the virtual prayers as well. So we've got Torah, which is what we're doing right now. We're learning together. Avodah, which is service in the temple, but at the moment it's something that we do through prayer. And Gemilut Chasadim, which is acts of kindness. Okay, so that is something that's so crucial to us. In terms of, it's not just something important, kindness, it's actually one of the three pillars of the world. And what's actually really interesting as well is that we're taught that the world was actually created through kindness, that God didn't need to create a world. God created the world in order to do kindness to us. God, in his infinite wisdom, decided that actually he wants to be able to give. God wanted to be able to do chesed, and therefore he created the world. That's the only reason that the world was created, so that God can connect to us and so that God can give to us. Now, how do we unmute everyone? It looks like I'm not the controller anymore for some reason, which is fine. So I can't unmute you, but if you could unmute yourselves, except for Miriam, for some reason I can unmute you. Yeah, if you guys can unmute yourselves. And what are our thoughts in terms of God being the creator of, and the reason that the reason God created the world is in order to do chesed to us. In order to do kindness? What are our thoughts about that? Anyone?
Should.
Turning it round, why else would it have been created?
So do you feel that the world is a world full of chesed?
Absolutely not.
Oh, I don't know.
It's
Why?
not full of it.
Well, it isn't full of it, but I suppose, you know, we all have look at all the volunteers that have come forward. I think there are more good than bad in the
But
world.
it doesn't mean the world is full of kindness. And I'm not sure that it was created for kindness. I'm not sure why we were created, but out of the creation, one hopes kindness will come.
Yes.
So that's a really interesting idea. Sorry, bear with me, please. So sorry about that. We just had a bike accident. So
Everyone all right?
yeah, it was just a bit grazed up. So yeah. Sorry about that. It's nice to see his brothers being so kind to him. So it all fits in on the theme of what we're
chesed.
Exactly. So I think the idea of God creating the world out of kindness is something that we really need to get our head around, because from God's perspective, so let's put man on the side for a minute, the action of man, but from God's perspective, does it seem likely that God does kindness through the world he's created? I guess, Kathy, the question's to you, because you were saying that you're challenged by this idea of the world being created through kindness.
I think that one hopes that God thinks he's created the world for kindness. He gives us food, he gives us air, he gives us the ability to breathe and to live. Was it provided? What I had difficulty with is the idea that the world was created through kindness, maybe for kindness. And I have this very, very strong belief now that man has abused the kindness And that's why we're going through what we're going through now.
Right, so I want to just put man on the side for 1 minute, even though we can't really, because actually we're talking about God giving to us as humans. But the idea of creating a world, do we all agree that God didn't need to create a world?
Yeah.
Right? He didn't owe us anything, did he?
No.
He didn't owe anything to anyone. Like God is, was, and always will be, and didn't need to do anything, but he chose to create a world. And we're taught that the way he created that world is through kindness. So if we look outside, and I always talk about the fact that I love human biology, but nature in general, if we look outside, there are so many beautiful things about the world around us.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the fact that God created this world of kindness, I think shows us the fact that God created the world so beautifully, I think shows God's kindness. He could have created a grey world or a green world. He could have created the world as one colour with one type of flower and one type of plant, or not even flowers, right? You don't have to have flowers. And, one type of food, and everyone could have looked the same. So that's even before we get to the idea of people. And then we look at the fact that every breath that we take, and we've discussed this already, right? But every breath we take is a gift, isn't it? Right now, we all know that so much more certainty than we ever did. Right? We all feel that now, don't we? Every one of us that is able to breathe on our own without a machine right now, it's a miracle. I remember, I think Sir Robert Winston had a book that I got, I think as a teenager, where he, based on one of his BBC series that I used to really enjoy the things that he did, talking about artificial limbs and how they help people grow new legs or new spine tissue and all these interesting things. And I remember, it's probably advanced a bit since then, but I remember looking at the idea of a heart, an artificial heart, and it's unbelievable what they can do with robotics and machinery and technology nowadays. But yet, if you think of the size of a human heart, there is no way that they could make something quite that small and also quite that efficient. Maybe one day we'll get to that point, but right now they're really struggling. But expand that even further in terms of our brains, because that's really was my area that I was the most interested in. The human brain is so fascinating, but I think literally we're beginning to scratch the surface in terms of understanding how it works, right? I did a degree in neuroscience, but I can tell you we still have no idea how we've got some theories and we're getting there very, very slowly, but really, really complex how our brain is. And if you have the most unbelievable computer in the world, right? The most complex computer in the world, it's still not able to do as many things as our brain.
No.
So God, the tiny little details, and I think the more we can get in tune with that, of the tiny details of kindness that God has given to us, I think that it makes us a more grateful person. I think that it makes us a more in tune with ourselves person. But the interesting thing is, when we say that God created the world with kindness, now let's include people. Because I think, Kathy, that's really important from what you were talking about. Let's now say, not just in terms of God creating unbelievable things, but God also created people. And people make up the world, right? There are lots of people in the world. There are animals as well, but we're going to talk about people. And people can be incredibly kind, right? Who, if you had to think of who to you is a paradigm of somebody who just does kindness, and it can be in the smallest way. I know I read something this week that really made me cry, actually. I don't know if other people saw it as well. I think there was a 90-something-year-old woman who said that she doesn't want to be put on a ventilator, and she passed away because she wanted to give it to someone who was younger than her, because
Yes,
she
I read
felt that
that.
she had lived a life. When I read that, I got shivers down my spine and I cried. Now, I'm not saying that that would be the Jewish, you know, if you would ask a halachic question, we don't say that a 90-year-old's life is any less valuable than a 40-year-old's, but what an unbelievable act of kindness that was.
But we have free will, so that was her choice.
Exactly, 100%. I think she's an amazing person, that was her choice. I really was very touched by what she did. But can you think of anyone who, you know, we mentioned Abraham and Sarah, and they really were the ultimate in terms of chesed. Can you think of anyone else that exemplifies kindness to you? Someone who you think is someone who's alive or someone who's not alive, but someone who, either through tiny little things or through really big things, that exemplifies this idea of kindness?
Well, I must be fortunate, because I do know a few people that are just very spiritual and very lovely.
And what would you say, Joe, what would you say that an example of their kindness would be?
Well, they just think of other people before themselves.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. And it's lovely to see it. It's just, you know, aren't we told the world is founded on love? If we love our fellow man, we love the creatures, we love everything. It's not always easy with difficult things that come up in life, but, you know, you see that love manifest in people's kindness.
Yeah.
I mean, I look at these volunteers now, these doctors and these nurses that are retired, they don't have to come back and put themselves in danger. I think there are 12,000 or whatever thousands there are, but they have, you know, so that's selfless, because they're on the front line and they're retired. They don't have to do it. And they've all volunteered to do it.
They're really making themselves vulnerable, aren't they?
Yes, yes.
Because, you know, if they're in contact with the virus the whole time.
I think you see that all around you if you look.
Yeah, 100%. I think you're seeing so much unbelievable kindness. I read another article about a doctor who has his son's going through chemotherapy at the moment, and he made a choice not to live at home for the next few months because he can't obviously continue working and being near his son. And his decision was he wasn't going to be with his 5-year-old son, I think it was, but instead he was going to continue looking after people who needed help. And you just think that is just unbelievable act of kindness.
I think kindness is inherent in everybody, but some people just don't know how to find it.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Well,
sometimes actually one of the things we can do for someone is to help them find their kindness.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes when you ask someone to help you with something, that's actually allowing them to be kind.
Yeah, yeah.
Definitely. I mean, to me, always think about Lady J.
Yes.
Yeah, it was lovely.
Everyone's smiling, right? Isn't it amazing how you just think about her and it makes us all smile? But she lived a life of kindness. She thought about other people. She heard someone had a simcha and she'd pick up the phone, or she'd jump in the car and she'd say, "Let's go." Right? She heard someone wasn't doing well, she'd pick up the phone and she'd be there for someone. Right? I know their family, after she passed away, they still speak about, but they made magnets. Do a Lady J, do it right away. Right? There's amazing ability. As soon as it pops into your head, oh, I should really be in touch with that person. Be in touch with that person. I'm not good at that. I really need to work on that. And, you know, I'd really like to be good at that idea of just send the message. You've no idea how meaningful it is to people. We do know actually how meaningful it means so much. It does. Just be in touch. Just send some love. Just share. Just be involved with that person. That really is this idea of chesed. And there is obviously a lot of negative that you can see that people do in the world as well, right? You can see a lot of very sad and bad things that happen. It's interesting, you know, this virus that we're all struggling with right now, that, you know, we're all stuck in our houses, that Pesach's not going to look like Pesach's ever looked like before. You can say, you know, God sent it, this man sent it, whatever you want to talk about, how it's being transmitted and why we don't know, right? We don't know. Is there a lot of kindness coming about because of it? Yes. Was there a lot of unkindness in terms of how people have been behaving as well? Of course, right? You look at the pictures of people still going to the parks and being arrested, right? You just think, like, really? Just stay at home, right? But maybe part of our kindness as well is to think of ways to not judge people, not approve of what they're doing, maybe even correct them for what they're doing, but still have feelings of kindness towards people. The interesting thing is, and we're going to continue talking about this next time, is can you have kindness without limits? Is that okay?
No, has to be balanced. That's why you have Gevura to balance. You have to have judgment with mercy. You cannot just have kindness, because you'll go too much to one side instead of being balanced in the middle.
Excellent, excellent. So we have this idea, too much kindness is not a good thing, right? Can we think of people who are like that? Does anyone know people who can never say no to anyone?
Yes, yes. All my family, my father's, we're all like that.
And what happens to you if you never, ever, ever say no or never look after yourself?
Well, you get worn out, don't you? And then you can't help anybody.
And then it comes back to bite you.
Yeah.
It comes back
and
to bite you.
And the other thing is that you get resentful, don't you?
Yeah.
You're just giving and giving and giving, and you get resentful because you're not actually looking out for yourself. You're not learning to say no. Someone taught me a wonderful thing. I think another Rebbetzen actually taught me this at one point, which was really helpful. That I hate saying no to people. I mean, I'm sure we all do, right? We all hate having to say, I'm really sorry, I can't do it. That's such a horrible thing to say. And she reframed it in a way that I loved. She said, you should say, I'd really love to, but I'm so sorry I can't. And I just love that idea that I would really love to say yes to everyone. I just can't, right? It's okay, I'm a human being, I can't. But this idea of saying no. But when we give and give and give without boundaries, that's very dangerous. And what's really interesting is we see with Avram and Sarah, Avram, we're going to talk about Avram because he was really chesed. Sarah was connected to his chesed, but she also balanced him a bit as well. We saw an example of this when she sent away Ishmael. So Sarah had an understanding of, yes, you should have chesed, but you need balance in it as well. And it was almost like Avram was chesed and Sarah was gevura within the way that they interacted. But you're right, they are both chesed, and their home was definitely a home of chesed. But Avram had two sons. One of his sons was called Yitzchak, and one of his sons was called Yishmael. Now, what's very interesting is we said you've got chesed, the idea of kindness. Yitzchak symbolizes gevura, which is the idea of strength or boundaries, and we're going to deal with him next time. So kindness gave birth to gevura, right? Chesed led to gevura. But what happened to Abraham's other son? And this is a really interesting one. You've got the idea of chesed. Yitzchak took the chesed but channeled it into gevura, so he changed from chesed into gevura. Yishmael, Avram's other son, took chesed, but he took it to the extreme. And we're taught that chesed, you've got the idea of chesed, and then you've got, it's almost like the peels, the outer side of chesed. So you've got the pure, beautiful, correct form of chesed. But then if you expand that too much, and I always think of an onion for some reason, but if you've got the peelings, the klipot, it's called, the peelings of chesed, if you take chesed to the extreme, you end up with, does anyone know what trait Yishmael represented? What their main, I guess their main sin or their main connection to negative, what they were connected to? Does anyone know that?
No, I don't.
What's interesting, do you remember learning about that before God gave the Torah, he went to the different nations and he said, would you like my Torah, right? We always tell it as a story. Do you want my Torah? And then this nation said yes, and this nation said no, and this nation said no. And finally he came to Israel and Israel said yes. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
So what happened in the Medrash that describes it, when Hashem went to Yishmael, Yishmael said to God, well, what's written in your Torah? Right? It's very nice to ask me if I want your Torah, but what's actually written in your Torah? And God said to Yishmael, And he said to him the midah, the character trait that he knew Yishmael would find most challenging. He said it talks about gilu arayot, which is forbidden relationships, immorality. And Yishmael said, no way, that's way too difficult for me. I'm not keeping that one. I don't want the Torah. What's interesting, when he went to Edom, which is what Esav represents, he said to them, it says you can't murder. And Esav said, no, they're murderers, right? If you look at the Western society, which is what Esav is, right? Germany, even England, America, it's all about guns and fighting and weapons, right? It's murder is part of our society, right? Think about the world wars. That is part of Edom's culture. But part of Yishmael's culture is immorality. And it's interesting if we think about it in terms of who Yishmael is nowadays. Who is Yishmael represented by?
Iran, I would think.
Lots
Not
of
just,
people in
I'd say
our
the Arab world.
society.
The Arab world, I'd say, yeah?
Yeah. Well, they're not all
What's
bad.
interesting is Yishmael and Edom are connected. They do kind of intermarry. So we've got, within Western society, you have that as well, this idea of immorality, 100%. But also within the world, the Arab world as well. It's so interesting whenever you look at the modesty, especially I think in terms of the women that you see within that world as well. And connecting to it and thinking about it in terms of, you know, I remember people telling me what they'll necessarily, they might wear very, very covered up clothes, but then some of the behavior or the way they dress underneath can be very provocative as well. It's just an interesting thing to talk about. But I think you're right, Kathy, in terms of our society in general, we've definitely seen this trait come through, this trait of immorality. Why is immorality taking chesed to the extreme?
Because they're doing what they want. They're doing what they like, what makes them happy. I don't know.
It's trying to be all things to all people.
The idea of chesed is giving to someone. And if you give and give and give and give and give to such a degree that you don't ever stop, it means that you can be with whoever you want, whenever you want, however you want. That's all okay. And that's what immorality is. Immorality is saying, I don't have any boundaries. It's okay for me to be together with somebody who I shouldn't be with, right? It's okay for me to behave in a way that I shouldn't, because everything's fine. I'm just giving and giving and giving. This idea of just wanting to give to people. It's interesting, even in terms of our laws, in terms of tzedakah, right? We know that we're meant to give 1/10 of our possessions to charity. You're not meant to give everything away. Right? That's not the correct thing to do, to just give and give and give and give. You need
Jacqueline,
to
have you been watching the new Netflix series, Unorthodox?
I didn't. I don't know if I'd like it, Kathy.
I don't know, but what you're talking really about just now, we saw the 3rd episode last night, and that's just brought to mind what you're saying now, where she's going into a society that is totally alien to her. And I'm thinking, is she giving? I don't know. I've got to look at it again and think about. We've seen the last episode tonight. I'm not sure
if I'm going to watch it, because it makes me really sad, these things, because I think that there's so much beauty in different societies and in different cultures, and I really get upset when they represent the negatives. But I don't know. I haven't seen it, so I can't really comment. That's the truth.
I wasn't sure what I'd think of it. I've got a friend who has said to me she wants to know what I think of it when I've seen it. So we're going to have a long discussion about it.
Yeah, I would be interested to hear. But what's interesting as well, in terms of when I was in university, I used to volunteer in a place. It doesn't actually exist anymore, but it used to be a place that girls who were really, really struggling, coming from homes, actually, Kathy, and you've probably heard of the Clubhouse, that it was a place where they could go to and be looked after. And one of the things that I found really interesting was when they were, very often, they'd been through horrendous times, and I don't judge them at all. But when they were rejecting their Judaism, very often they were rejecting a lot of other things as well. And their morality was definitely one of them. And I think that you know, when you see a victim of abuse, or when you see someone who's gone through such a hard time, and you see that they value themselves so little that they just want to be appreciated, and they just want to give to people, and they don't care who that person is or how they're being valued, that it's really, really heartbreaking. And it's interesting, Kathy, because I don't know what this program, like I said, I haven't seen it, I've just read a little bit about it, but I just think that one of the most amazing things that as a society we have to show each other and teach each other is how to show kindness, and also, which we'll discuss next time, is how to know when it's okay to say no. Because those are both crucial skills in terms of the world that we live in. And as I said, Olam Chesed Yibana, God made the world with kindness, and it's for us to tap into that kindness and to show kindness to others. But at the same time, as we're going to discuss next time, we need to know that it can't be kindness to too much of an extent that's not good for us either. So that's kind of the first idea in terms of what we're thinking about in terms of weeds. Just to connect that into Pesach and our Seder, what do we think the connection is going to be with our matzahs?
Not sure what you mean.
Don't know what you mean.
The idea of chesed and kindness. Obviously, we're for the most part, we're going to be eating wheat matzahs, aren't we?
Well, we share them, the family come together, you remember all the past, there were the many, that same moment all over the world, Jews are all doing the same thing. We're all joining in the mitzvah.
Definitely. I think that part of what matzah really shows us is the kindness of God, that he took us out of Egypt, isn't it? And that it was done so quickly that the bread didn't even have time to rise. Now, I don't know about you, but when you make when you make bread, what are you talking about? Half an hour, an hour? It's not exactly long. And especially if you think Egypt was boiling hot, right? You're talking about the desert, but they were in such a rush. How amazing would it have been if the dough would have had time to rise? We could have all been eating our challahs, right? But they were in such a rush. God needed to get them out. It wouldn't be Pesach, it's true. But God needed to take them out in such a rush so that they could really enjoy so that they could be saved. They needed to be taken out right then. And the matzah, I think, to us, when we're eating that wheat, part of what we want to think about is how fortunate we are. We're talking about, matzah is called lechem oni, which is the poor man's bread, right? It's reminding us that we were slaves. It's reminding us that we were poor. But actually, what we can think about, and I think this year especially so important to think about, every one of us is going to have a challenging Pesach. Is going to have a Pesach where we think, if only. Is going to have a Pesach that we're going to think, this is really hard. But when we eat our matzah, maybe we can think of things that we're grateful for. That's Diana's all about that, right? That what is the kindness of God, that please God, I'm going to be sitting at my Seder table enjoying my matzah, rather than thinking about all the people who, whether they're NHS people working on Yom Tov, or whether they're people who are unfortunately in hospital because they're struggling to breathe. That's what I'm going to think about when I eat my matzah. Please God, we should all really be feeling up to it and feeling healthy and feeling good. Gary, did you have a comment? No. Okay. So thank you all very much. I hope that gave us a little bit of an insight into the first of the 7 species. I hope to see you again soon, and we will, please God, be sharing some other ideas together. And it is really lovely seeing people's faces, I have to say.
Thank you, Jacqueline.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. A nice way to spend an hour too.
I nearly didn't watch it, didn't join in, because I've just been on one with my drama group, my youth relay group now, and I feel I'm nearly out of battery here. I must just very glad.
Thank you, Josephine, for joining, and it sounds great doing a drama group as well. Isn't it amazing how many different things we can do from our own couch? It's like unbelievable how much we can connect to people.
Yeah, we're so busy. We're busier than we were before all this happened.
100%. 100%.
Never used so much technology ever. Phones.
Once you're on, it's amazing, isn't it? Yeah.
Thanks
Okay,
very
well,
much.
take care, everyone. See you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.